Hi, everybody. Today is Wednesday, February 5th, 2025, and our friends are back with us. Grandfather Ray McGovern and Colonel Wilkerson. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nima.
Let's get started with the situation of the Middle East and with Gaza. Donald Trump is talking about he has the solution about Gaza. He has the solution for the situation in Gaza, and he doesn't know about the future of the ceasefire. But here is what he said about sending Gazans to Egypt and Jordan.
Might accept Palestinians from Gaza.
Well, I think Jordan and Egypt will. I know they've spoken about it with you, and they say they're not going to accept. I say they will. But I think other countries will accept also. I think that Gaza maybe is a demolition site right now. If you look at Gaza, it's all, I mean, there's hardly a building standing, and the ones that are going to collapse. You can't live in Gaza right now, and I think we need another location. I think it should be a location that's going to make people happy. You look over the decades, it's all death in Gaza. This has been happening for years. It's all death.
Go ahead, Ray. What's your take?
Nima, you may recognize my change of attire. I just like to start by saying that we are called to be crackerjack analysts, which at least two of my colleagues are. But we're also called to remain human. Bishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa said, "To remain neutral in times like these is to be on the side of the oppressor." So here I am in the dentist office with my keffiyeh on. And the dental hygienist comes out and she looks at me and she says, "Oh," and her tears well up in her eyes. And I say, "You recognize this?" And she says, "Yes, my mom is Palestinian." And I said, "From Gaza?" She said, "No, from Egypt, but her mom is from Gaza." And her tears welled up. Okay. Now, on the way home, after I took Rita for this dentist thing, I broke out crying. I haven't cried in lots of times. And Rita said, "Are you crying for your Palestinian friends on the West Bank and elsewhere?" I said, "Yeah, but I'm crying. It's crying for the beloved country." Look up the novel, South African novelist Patton. I cry for our beloved country because I think that unless many of us remain on the side of the not oppressor, on the side of those who are being oppressed, that our country has gone right under our legs. I'm sorry for this little oration here, but I haven't cried in a long time. I did today, and I told Rita why. She was not surprised.
Larry.
Either you froze, Nima, or you're having a problem.
No. Larry, go ahead.
I thought you were going to cry.
Oh.
I feel like it sometimes too. With Netanyahu sitting there with his little yellow ribbon on and his Israeli flag on and his photogenic, perfect red tie, looking at the cameras, and Trump extolling the things he extolled, because that's what he was doing. He was extolling the death and destruction of the whole people. And the man who was responsible was sitting right there beside him with sort of a piggish smile creeping into his face. And then I said to myself after watching that, well, it's very, very appropriate that the man who enabled it, that the ultimate empire, the true weight behind all of this slaughter and killing and genocide, is the United States. So that's a perfect situation to display right there. And to have the president of the United States think about it cavalierly the way he was and would subsequently do to an even greater depth of ignominy is just, in my view, a perfect rendition, however sad it may be and tear bringing it might be, of the state of the empire today. We are absolutely unconscionable, reprehensible, disgusting. We will go down in the annals of empire far worse than Genghis Khan or the Moguls or the Ottomans or the Mongols or the British, because they lived in a different time. Yes, they committed crimes, and yes, they were high crimes. And they did terrible things throughout the reach and breadth of their empires. But they didn't live today. They didn't live after Nuremberg. They didn't live after the very genocide that the Jewish people so celebrate and historically look back upon as a moment in their history, their people's history, that defined them and made them what they are today. We've been a long way since 1945. We've crafted international law. We've crafted international criminal courts. We've crafted the Geneva Conventions, all of them. And yes, the empire has bastardized them most violently and viciously under my president, George W. Bush, with his state-sanctioned torture program. But we've never sunk to the depths that we are now sunk to. We have no reputation left. We are pure, raw, unadulterated power. And Donald Trump is a perfect president for that, because that's what he is. And that little scene there in the Oval Office was a perfect rendition of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure that Trump was fully aware of what he was saying in talking about the absolute destruction and desolation of Gaza. I had the sense almost that he was unaware that he was sitting next to Netanyahu saying all those things, because it was really right in Netanyahu's face. Because obviously Netanyahu is the primary instrument of all this destruction. But it's an extraordinary and saddening and sickening performance. The only possible tiny ray of hope that I might see out of all of this is that maybe we have reached the bottom. I don't think, I think even maybe, as we know now, Trump has backed off a tiny bit on this, whether the U.S. troops will be involved. I think that maybe the world now has reached an even greater turning point. Maybe U.S. even strategic thinking has possibly crossed a certain strategic line, and there may be no going back. I think we may be entering a very new era of international politics with Trump in power. Not necessarily better, but it's going to be a sharper break from the kind of things that we would have tolerated for so long in the past. That's a hope.
Yeah. Here is the question, Ray. When you look at the situation right now, right after what Donald Trump has said about Gaza and sending the people to Egypt and Jordan, we've learned many countries, the leaders, Saudi Arabia was talking about that would not be the case for Saudi Arabia. They're seeking for two-state solution. And we had Turkey, the foreign minister of Turkey was talking about this, and nobody seems to accept what Donald Trump is talking about. And we know that Antony Blinken tried so hard to, I would say, covertly do what Donald Trump is trying to do overtly. How is that going to work for Donald Trump?
Well, you're right, Nima. Blinken tried that with President Sisi of Egypt, and Sisi almost threw him out of the office. He laughed him to scorn. We're not going to do that. I don't care how many tents you give us. We're not going to accept the Palestinian driving the Palestinians out. So, what leverage does Trump have over President Sisi of Egypt, the King of Jordan? Well, I understand because I watched an interview of Richard Haas a little while ago in the dentist's office. I understand that that the Egyptians and the Jordanians are coming to Washington within the next week or so. Graham, you're far better able to analyze what's likely to come out of that, but there is considerable leverage, my God, you know? And what are these people going to try to do? I mean, what I'm concerned about is that this will become normal, my God, normal, to drive out 2 million people into some other country or to try to do that. Now, it may be that nobody will be takers. I don't know who Trump believes gave him encouragement or approval for this. But unless our Congress and our people, anybody with any influence, even in the media, if it's possible to redeem the media, unless we stand up, then we become very much like the Germans in early 1933. Who were guilty of sheepish submissiveness. Okay, that's a translation from a German term written by a lawyer who observed the whole damn thing. Now, Hitler didn't enjoy a majority, as most of you know, but the Social Democrats caved. The Christian Centrum Party caved. And before you knew it, everybody was too afraid to do anything. And I'm afraid that could happen in this country. And that's why I cry the beloved country.
Yeah. I wonder, you mentioned, Ray, quite accurately that the U.S. does have some leverage over Jordan, King Hussein in Jordan and Sisi in Egypt, which is primarily financial, of course. We send them all kinds of support over many, many, many years to maintain the peace with Israel. But if it comes to at least to the King Hussein in Jordan, for him this will become an existential issue. Jordan is, I forget the exact statistics, but at least is 50 to 60% Jordanian. If the U.S.
Palestinian.
I'm sorry, Palestinian.
Right.
Yes, exactly. If this were to go through, I think the rage within Jordan would be palpable among the Palestinians, and I think King Hussein's position and in power would be in extreme danger. I doubt that he would even survive at this point. Already the Arabs have shamed themselves enough, as we all know, by failing not even militarily, but not even politically, to support much of the Palestinian cause. We don't see much criticism, but this is getting to be a very dangerous game. And I think the people like King Hussein and even Sisi in Egypt are increasingly tricky, dangerous situations. They don't like Palestinians. Most Arab rulers do not like Palestinians. It's not because they have anything against Palestinians as a people or ethnically, but Palestinians stand for anger, for demonstration, for justice, demanding justice, calling for political change and this kind of thing. You don't do that in the Arab world. This scares the monarchs and the kings and the emirs and all this kind of thing. So they don't want any hint of demonstration of sympathy for Palestinians, because the next thing you know, it's going to turn against them themselves.
Larry.
Well, I didn't realize until yesterday when I saw some of the stats how existential this situation is for Egypt too. Not just Sisi, whose hold on power is more tenuous every day, but it's a question of space and water and food. And Egypt is already maxed out. I mean, it is maxed out. And without the 3.6 billion we give them annually to bribe them to keep the peace treaty, there'd be no salary for the Egyptian military. That's the other fact I got that's pretty solid. So he's between a rock and a hard place. And I can't imagine that he'd want to take that rock and increase its weight by a ton. And that's what he'd be doing if he took 2 million or even half of them, 1 million more Palestinians. And as Graham just said, there's no love lost between, there's argument amongst people who do the Levant that Egyptians are even Arabs. Was Nasser an Arab? They don't like the Palestinians for every reason that Graham said, plus that. They're not going to do it. And Abdullah's position is tenuous too, because he's sitting on, I think, 6 million already. And he'd be sitting on another, say he took half, he'd be sitting on another 1 million plus. That's untenable for him too. He's already got a very, very slim hold on his kingdom. It'd be very destabilizing, and you'd have a mess, and that would drive Riyadh nuts, because Riyadh's expectations are those of Donald Trump. We're going to have concrete from Riyadh all the way to Beirut, and it's going to be $20 billion worth of Saudi concrete. We're going to have this incredible bazaar that everybody's going to participate in, and is going to make MBS a hero of the Muslim world, and we're going to live all in happiness forever. That's the whole design, and we're mucking up that design. And Donald's attempt to cement it, if you will, at the north end is just preposterous.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me just play a clip. Donald Trump talking about the situation in Gaza.
The Palestinians want to go back to Gaza, is they have no alternative. It's right now a demolition site. This is just a demolition site. Virtually every building is down. They're living under fallen concrete that's very dangerous and very precarious. They instead can occupy all of a beautiful area with homes and safety, and they can live out their lives in peace and harmony instead of having to go back and do it again. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. Do a real job, do something different.
Yeah, the U.S. will take over Gaza. What would that mean, Ray?
We're watching two sociopaths there. Let's not shy away from that description. They have no feeling for these people that will suffer from all this. I was hoping, against hope, of course, that when Trump said these things, he said, yeah, it's been destroyed beyond belief, and this is the guy who did it. But it was almost as if, I don't know who did it. It just happened, right? Well, this is the rub. Now, back to Richard Haas, whom Larry knows far better than I do, having worked under his tutelage when he was, if memory serves, head of the Policy Planning Council of the State Department. Now, Katie Couric is interviewing him for almost a whole hour. Here I am in the dentist's office, able to watch this, okay? Now, I was surprised. Katie Couric gave a better account of herself than I had seen before, but Richard Haas, my God, he's a Zionist. He was a designer of this policy back when, and Larry can tell us when. Hass in German means hate. I don't know Hass's heart, but to the degree he loved Israel and is a Zionist, usually the obverse of that is to hate the Palestinians. That came through as he described what happened in Gaza, how Gaza happened to be what it is today. It was ridiculous. Katie Couric didn't correct him, but that's what's being fed as pablum to the United States citizenship, and it's our job. And thanks, Nima, for holding this impromptu discussion. It's our job to tell our neighbors, look, what you've been told is a bunch of lies. These people are sociopaths, and it would be good to describe what a sociopath is so that American people can know. This happened before. His name was Hitler. I do not shy away from saying the same thing has happened right now.
Graham. Graham,
Yes.
go ahead. Do you want to?
Um,
Any
I,
other than
I agree with what Ray has said. I think the Zionist hold, frankly, on American media over decades and decades is almost unbreakable, almost impenetrable. So I don't know how much optimism I have, whether if we have a few talking heads like ourselves who we would like to think are more correct than Richard Haas. Maybe we are, hopefully we are, but I just don't know, frankly, how possible it is to get through the myths and centuries, not centuries, decades and decades of pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist propaganda. I grew up in that. I read this book. I'm struggling to remember the name of it, but it was about the founding of Israel. One of these very popular writers. I'll think of it the minute I stop talking. But glorifying the whole
Leon Uris?
Leon Uris, exactly. Leon Uris. It was a very exciting book when I first read it. That these people arising out of these horrors of their history and creating this new state, blah blah. All kinds of people have been brought up in that. Our movies, our films. There's very little critical dialogue or examination. Ironically, I hate to say it, but the savagery of what's going on now is perhaps the only thing that may cause people to rethink the nature of the Israeli state and to recognize that this is that if there is a David and Goliath, that now it is Israel that is the Goliath and no longer the David. So I take some hope in that at least these horrors that we've been witnessing are beginning to produce perhaps a more calculated, balanced view of things. Secondly, also, I think we have to look at generational differences. It does seem to me that I wish I was of a younger generation myself to be part of it, but a younger generation that seems to be not buying the usual thing of glorifying Israel. And now it's much more sympathy for the Palestinian cause. And furthermore, the participation of lots and lots and lots of young American Jews who are disgusted and fed up with the Jewish state and the depredations of Netanyahu in Palestine. So I think there may be some shifting of the ground underneath us that could be encouraging. But in the meantime, I'm afraid it's going to cost lots and lots of Palestinian lives. And I'm afraid that Congress, which, as Mark Twain, you may know, a century ago said, we have the finest Congress that money can buy. And certainly the Zionist lobby has bought hook, line, and sinker the entire Congress. So that makes it very difficult to push back against this. When you watch, every congressman in the hall leaping to their feet. Ray, you may remember that too, in Soviet days of the burnia applaudismenti, the stormy applause every time Khrushchev or anybody else would speak. Well, this is what we've got, is stormy applause in Congress. The only thing they will stand up and give stormy applause for is the Zionist argument. So I just don't think this is sustainable too much longer, but money speaks.
Neva, can I interrupt just for a second?
Go ahead.
Exerting a prerogative of age. Now, Graham is almost as old as I am. Okay, Larry's a lot younger.
I'm older than you,
Are you?
Graham.
Okay. Well, I was 9 years old in the Bronx when Israel got its known homeland. That was incredible rejoicing. We had parades up and down the Grand Concourse. Okay. Finally, Israel had a homeland, and nobody told me, nobody told anybody that it wasn't a place where no people were. It was a place where 75,000 Palestinians would be knocked out of there to places like Gaza and the West Bank and
Yeah.
further afield. So, you know, we grew up in this ethos. I watched the movie, Eurus's movie. I mean, it was just so thoroughly propagandized, and it's not very different today. And I'm sorry to interject here because I would really like to hear what Larry has to say about Richard Haas.
No, I was going to say something about Leon Uris. As a matter of fact, I read a very good piece the other day about a gentleman, Palestinian, of course, who appears on our IPC simulations every now and then, who is suggesting that that's what the Palestinians need. They need a big lie too, like Leon Uris perpetrated for the Israelis. And so he says, let's go off and write this big lie and let's put it in the mainstream media. He's got a point there. Richard Haas has gone through a transformation that's been amazing for me to watch. Because when I told Powell that I was going to work for Haas rather than directly for him at the State Department and explain my reasons why, he said, okay, you can do it for a while. Go down and tell the deputy, Rich Armitage. So I went down to tell him, and Richard looked at me, and this is a verbatim quote. He said, why do you want to work for that self-loathing Jew? And I said to him, I'll forget you said that, Rich. I'm leaving now. And I walked out of his room to his harumphs in the rear. And I found over the 9 to 10 months that I worked on the policy planning staff why Rich had said that. You got to remember, Rich signed the clean break strategy. Rich was a hardcore neoconservative, mind you, working.
Armitage. Right.
Yeah, working for Colin Powell. So, and I watched Rich try to keep his bona fides with Cheney the whole time because he wanted desperately to be Secretary of Defense. So I'm down there and I'm seeing exactly why Rich had said that from his perspective, because Richard Haas was very balanced, extremely balanced, and took on Condi Rice and a number of other people with that balance. At the same time, he was our special ambassador at large for the Irish peace talks, you may recall, and was engaged in that periodically. And so he was seeing that up close and personal, immersed in it. And that really shaped his views about this sort of struggle. And to go to the Council on Foreign Relations, become its head for so damn long, a incestuous place, a terrible place in my view, he's changed. He's completely changed. He's now an ultra-Zionist as far as I can tell. So there you go. That's what happens to you. But I want to go back to the point, Nima. You know what my point is. This is not Israel qua Israel. This is the empire. Israel is doing our wishes, period. Lindsey Graham let the cat out of the bag on the floor of the Senate when he said, listen, people, if they were doing it, we'd have to be there doing it. Well, what is it? Trying to reestablish U.S. hegemony in the Gulf, which has been lost since the Shah fell. That's what we're using Israel for. So the person responsible for what is happening there was also sitting beside Bibi Netanyahu, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden before him, and Barack Obama before him, and George W. Bush before him. And in 2004, when Bush took Ariel Sharon into the Oval Office and looked him in the eye in front of Powell, with Powell getting ready to embark for the Middle East on his last attempt to do anything under the roadmap, under the Middle East peace process that was so vaunted, Bush looked at Sharon and said, it's yours now. For 45 years, everything has failed. Everything has failed. We've done nothing of success. It's failed. Over to you. You do what you need to do, and we'll support you 100%. That's what started it. It's the U.S. as much as Israel, if not more.
Ray, your take. Go ahead, Graham.
No, I was just going to say, I think time may be running out on that, Larry. I remember vividly those days, and you describe it perfectly. But I think the tolerance now to support Israel and everything it does, and especially sadly that we all get to watch this prime time live on television, bomb after bomb after bomb, and building after building collapsing, and live children being pulled out and dying in parents' arms. I think this is having a huge impact on the world. I also think now that the Arab states, even places like Saudi Arabia, they will not dare now to turn their back on the Palestinians, even if they think the Palestinians are leftist or rebel rousers or whatever else. There, in a sense, the Middle East is coming together in a way that I have not seen for a very long time. We saw the terrible quarrels between Qatar on the one hand and Saudi Arabia and UAE on the other. We had the U.S. Um, promoting hatred and fear and loathing between Iran and Saudi Arabia for decades. And we are there. Don't worry, Saudi Arabia. We're there for you against the Iranian danger. That doesn't seem to be washing anymore. I don't. I've never seen a situation in which all the states of the region, including non-Arab Persia, non-Arab Iran, is joining more or less in an understanding that the Middle East paradigm just is not working anymore and has to change, and we are not trustworthy as Americans.
Yeah, Nima, let me endorse what Graham just said. We have to be alert for how things shift, even if they're galactic shifts. But getting back to Israeli strongmen, no one's stronger than Ariel Sharon. Okay. Now, I know this from a book written by O'Neill, Secretary of the Treasury under W. Bush, who was just sworn in the morning of a National Security Council meeting, the first one of the George W. Bush administration. So I know what O'Neill said. And what he said was this. George Bush said, you know, I've been to Israel. Ariel Sharon took me around in my helicopter, and I looked down at that godforsaken Gaza and those other terrorists. I mean, my God, they're just awful. There's nothing we can do about that. I know about that, and I know about Ariel Sharon. He's a strong man. I think we should give him his head. We should let him do what he wants. Now, according to O'Neill, Colin Powell raised his hand and said, "Oh, now, Mr. President, that may cause all kinds of other problems." And according to O'Neill, the president, well, okay, everybody's on board on that. Okay, that's what we're going to do. We're going to do what Sharon wants. Now, we all know that Israel had a major role to play in Bush Cheney's decision to attack Iraq, and we know what ensued from all this. So, you know, this whole business about a strong man. Well, Trump, I think, has decided to be stronger still than Sharon or Netanyahu or both of them put together. Okay. And we have to stop that. That happened before. That happened in the 1930s. It's up to us to stop that if we pretend to be a democracy.
Yeah.
Larry, do you think that Donald Trump is taking the situation in Gaza so simply, so simple-mindedly that he can, because the way he's talking about Gaza, it seems that he's talking about his neighborhood, and he wants to move some people from his neighborhood to rebuild it and not giving them to the same people that he moved away from the neighborhood. And here is these people were fighting Israel for more than 15 months, and they have lost everything. And you can not find a single Gazans that hasn't lost a member in his family.
Or
This
his
is
whole
the
family.
problem. Yeah, or all the time. When you look at the way that Donald Trump is talking about, and it seems that he's talking about, we're going to build a big city, I don't know, somewhere else in Jordan, in Egypt. But that's not the problem. You're not addressing the issue in Gaza. These people are willing to live in that part of the land destroyed, leveled by Israelis, with the same situation that they're in right now.
if you'd seen the videos I saw yesterday passed to me by a woman who is actually walking through the Netzarim corridor with the people going north and taking her cell phone out, and she spoke fairly good English, and she's talking into the cell phone. She's also talking to the flank security standing up on burned out vehicles and burned out ruins of homes and such. And the security really puzzled me because it spoke very good English and looked a lot like an American SOF veteran, or maybe even American active duty SOF, and spoke good English and talked about the money he was making being there, providing flank security for them. But the thing that really impressed me was as they moved up this corridor of ruin and damnation and destruction, they were euphoric. And she would interview them from time to time, and then she would translate. And what they were saying from time to time when she did that was, we're going home. We're finally going home. We're going home. I'm so happy. They were hugging each other and everything. And hundreds of them were passing up this road going to the north in complete ruin. And Donald, you're going to take them away from that and make them go somewhere else? I don't think so. Over their dead bodies, which is exactly what Netanyahu knows. And that's what he's been creating, their dead bodies.
That's the definition of a sociopath, okay? Now, one thing that's missing, I think, these days is an Eleanor Roosevelt. We're about to see even a worse Holocaust than the genocide we've already seen, perhaps. Now, when Franklin Roosevelt was faced with the prospect of taking a lot of Jews escaping from Nazi Germany, he didn't want to do it because it was not a popular thing to do politically. And Eleanor pulled her hair out and said, Franklin, you got to do this. And he said he wouldn't do it, okay? And so one ship off the coast of Virginia, she made sure that each of those passengers got a visa of some kind showing that they could land and go into the hinterland of Virginia. That's how strongly she felt about that, okay? Now, we have a new kind of Holocaust. I don't think you have to have 6 million, if that's the real figure. How about 2 million, okay? Is that Holocaust? It is. And where's the Eleanor Roosevelt here? Where's the political figure that has a heart and a soul and is not a sociopath? Well, maybe that's up to us, folks. We have to figure out some way to sensitize our fellow citizens to the fact that this happened before. It's not going to happen again unless over our dead bodies.
Yeah, I'm a little more pessimistic perhaps than Ray. In one sense, I spoke a few minutes ago that I was encouraged by the younger generation and by the attitudes of many American Jews who were bravely standing up and strongly against Netanyahu and all those policies. On the other hand, I think it's just going to be very hard to turn decades and decades of American thinking around in this regard, and the strange American identification somehow with Israel as a victorious, powerful force that the United States would like to think it is as well, and that we see as an ally supporting our posture around the world. Maybe during the Cold War, you could possibly argue that a little bit, that Israel was an ally in a dangerous area in the Middle East, ally to us. But I don't think that's the case anymore. And Israel, many people have commented on it. Israel is no longer an ally in any meaningful sense, and is actually a weight around our neck, an albatross around our neck in pursuing in any policies in the region, and much to the disgust of the rest of the world. So I don't think we're going to come out of this looking very well, no matter what happens. It just convinces people that the American hegemon is more dangerous and more fearsome than they had suspected, and they will not want to take part in it. And even the Europeans, whom I'm afraid I view as craven and having no independence of mind, themselves have to be somewhat disturbed as this goes on and on and on, and without any voice from the West speaking in moral terms that the West used to pride itself upon.
Larry, how can we understand the behavior of Israelis, and how can we understand the perception on the part of the United States on the way that Israel is helping the United States in the Middle East? How is that possible? Because as long as we know the situation with Gaza is making the picture of the United States, the dominance of the United States, weaker, in my opinion. Because it doesn't matter how these leaders feel about the United States, the public opinion is totally against what's going on in Gaza. This is a sea change. Are they considering the public opinion in the Middle East?
You know how I feel about the geopolitical situation and what's happening. I think it's irrepressible. It's inextinguishable. It's inexorable. The power is moving from the west back to the east. The magnet attracting that movement is China. They are surrounded by people who don't believe in sanctions and war. Tell me how many wars China is in. How many countries has China sanctioned? Or any of the ASEAN countries for that matter, or the BRICS countries. They have a different modality about them. They have a different attitude towards power in the world. We can claim all day long that it's like ours, but it isn't. It's distinctly different. Putin is caught in the middle. Russia is always caught in the middle. Half its foot is in Asia and half its foot is in Europe, if you will. Or 1 foot in Europe, 1 foot in Asia, however you want to look at it. So Putin's got to make up his mind as to which way he wants to go with this inexorable global shift of power to the east. We can accommodate that or we can fight it. We have chosen to fight it. And Israel is one of the dogs we use in this fight. Ukraine is another. We're trying to overthrow the election results in Romania right now for Colin Georgescu. We don't want him to be president of Romania because he's threatened to take Romania out of NATO. We're trying to unseat the Dream Party in Tbilisi because they want a balanced foreign policy. No, we want a government in there that wants us alone and invites war from Russia. We even sent Simone, the former president who wouldn't surrender power when the Dream Party won, to the Arizona McCain Institute so she could form an NGO and go back to Georgia and help us unseat the Dream Party. We're doing all of this because we're trying to stop this inexorable shift of power. And all of these little proxy conflicts we're trying to, Europe is doing it too in their own way. Germany's getting ready to probably elect the former CEO of BlackRock to be its new chancellor. I mean, that's absurd to me. That's insane. Germany's economy is in turmoil, and this guy's going to come in and create more billionaires. The quintessential non-person to put in as the chancellor of Germany. So this is how broken we are. But we want this breakage. We want this breakage because we think it will arrest this shift of power. It won't. And we're doing everything we possibly can to expedite this shift. And China knows it, and China just needs to bide its time. The shift will take place. And the world will be a better place. I'll be dead, but the world will be a better place when we're gone. And someone else is not a hegemon, but at least the most powerful bloc in the world dealing with things like climate change and nuclear weapons. Because we seem to have no desire to do that.
Let me just make a quick comment. You mentioned Georgia, Tbilisi. The U.S. AID agency has been pretty much put on the back burner, but some of its website before it collapsed was very instructive. There was a $26,490,000 amount given to the Georgia Elections and Political Processes Activity. The donor, the awarder was Agency for International Development, and the purpose was Consortium for Elections and Political Process Strengthening. So, as much as I decry, I mean, the USAI did this really good work for very impoverished countries. But my God, it also was working for the descendant of the CIA called the National Endowment for Democracy. And this is what they end up with, color revolutions. At least that's on hold for what, 90 days or so? So we should be thankful for small favors, I would submit.
I was not one who opposed what he did with USAID. Not in any way. I saw USAID under Andrew Natsios up close and personal. And what it had become was a few, very few State Department personnel managing a mass of contractors, all of whom were interested in making money.
Mm-hmm.
And as Ray just intimated, making money sometimes creating color revolutions.
Yeah, I always think about the old AID that was part of the State Department. That was different, as you know better than I.
Jesse Helms, ACTA, USIA, all of it, destroyed it.
Yep.
Yeah. What particularly bothers me too is that the U.S. foreign policy seems to have lost any sense of idealism that at least I grew up to believe in, and maybe perceived around the world in 20, 30, 40 years ago working. But today I don't see anything except so-called democracy promotion, which, as we know, is generally the code name for overthrowing regimes we don't like in the name of democracy. But where I don't see the U.S. as having any constructive policy other than a military policy. It is, I don't know what it stands for except for blocking Russia, blocking China, blocking states that we don't care for. But this is not a constructive, creative policy in the least. It's very negative and retrogressive and trying to go back to the old days. I don't think it's working, but it's going to be very painful to have to go through that whole process. And I don't see any mood in the U.S. yet to change that.
Yeah, I call it a policy of fear. It's a fear of that shifting power.
Well, what has not been appreciated up until now is how close Russia and China are.
Yeah.
Larry's exactly right in saying that Russia decided Peter the Great was right then, but he's not right anymore. The West is from hunger, as we used to say in the Bronx. We'll go east. And of course, Xi welcomed him with open arms to the point of reversing his bedrock policy of Westphalia and endorsing, or at least acquiescing in, Putin's advance into Ukraine. That was earth-shattering. That was a major tectonic shift. Now, the people that were advising...
Yeah, major violation of everything the Chinese always said to me when I was doing diplomacy with them.
That's right, yeah. And I have to say, self-confession here, I didn't think Putin was going to go into Ukraine. Why? Because all my Chinese scholar friends told me the Chinese would never approve it. Yeah. Okay? Well, so it wasn't just me who was wrong. It turned out he went up to Beijing on the 4th of February, 2 weeks before the invasion, and said, "Look, we're going to have to do this. Here's why." And Xi Jinping said, "Well, not until after the Olympics are over, right? I mean, after the Winter Olympics are over." And Putin said, "Yes, sir. They're over on the 20th." Everything happened the next 4 days, and of course, then you had the invasion. So this is the big deal, okay? Now, maybe I'm a little caught up in this because my first portfolio, as Graham Fuller and I were in junior officer trainee training, my portfolio in the Directorate of Intelligence Analysis was the Sino-Soviet relationship. And there were all kinds of people saying, no, this business, they're commies and they'll always stay together. And for decades, I made hay of saying, no, they're not coming. They're at each other's throats. And we're able to play on those differences to achieve things like arms control agreements, like agreements on Berlin that never would have been possible if there wasn't a real drive on the part of our leaders to prevent Russia and China from getting the other person from getting the other country from getting a leverage. So what I'm saying now is things change, right? And under the impact of these changes, where Obama, Biden, and all the others made it clear that we don't respect you, Russia. You're a gas station posing as a country, and we don't have to take into account your concerns, your strategic concerns. Well, there was very little alternative than for Putin to exploit his 42 one-on-ones with Xi Jinping and create the kind of relationship where there's mutual trust that has never been seen before. Russia and China are bound at the hip now, and I perceive that as long as I'm on this globe, they'll continue to be so, as long as there's a hegemon that still fights for past hegemony.
Well, also, Ray, I think you could argue that the U.S. is really the godfather, godmother, or birth mother, whatever you want to call it, of the increasing BRICS movement, in which people more and more decide that whatever the U.S. has been, or whatever few good qualities it has, it's not the way they see the future. In effect, I tend to see BRICS as the nascent future of a form of a new UN. And we in the United States unwittingly, against our knowledge, have helped produce that movement. And I think Europe is essentially being just swept away in this whole thing. I just see Europe as a tiny little tail of Eurasia that is quite irrelevant in most respects now, except that they happen to make some good food and some good beer. But beyond that,
Yes.
what else is there? So we are the godparents of this new movement, which is still in the early stages. We don't know where it's going to go. It's bound to have divisions among itself, but it is the new order.
If you go to Samarkand and Dushanbe and Tashkent, you'll see where it's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see.
Yeah.
If you look under the Caspian Sea at 100 years of methane and fossil fuels, you'll see where it's going to go.
Okay.
It's going east. It's going east. And there's nothing we can do about it except accommodate it. And
Yep.
accommodating it is the best policy. But fighting it puts new tooth in their sails. And, Wang Yi used to use the expression all the time about the ASEAN community. The ASEAN community was the perfect example. They defied us. We wanted them to have a security component. You must have a security component. You must. We insisted on it. No, they didn't want to. Lee Kuan Yew and the other elders out there said, no, ASEAN is for trade and commerce and comity and collaboration and cooperation. That's where China is. China adopted it. And that's where they are. That's their philosophy. And Russia got, as Ray just said, Russia got pulled into that for all kinds of reasons. But one was acceptance. I think Putin actually feels that way too. He'd like to be left alone. And the U.S. won't leave him alone.
Yeah.
So you go,
Yep.
It will.
Yeah, one aspect of this is a very insidious one, and that is when you look at BRICS and you look at the people in BRICS and the population. Well, most of those folks are people of color.
Yes, most of them are Asian too.
Yeah. Now look at NATO. What's distinctive about NATO? Oh my God, they're all white.
Yep.
Maybe you could make a case of Turkey as part not white, but my God, are we dividing the world into a dichotomy where one has to prevail over the other? My God. And what the non-white people see when they see what Trump wants to do in Gaza is reflective of what James Baldwin told Angela Davis.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, during Vietnam, when he said, as long as we consider our white privilege we will bless whatever atrocities we do with respect to non-white people. That's what they see now. That's what the whole world sees now. And so, unless we knock it off, unless we assert our rights as citizens of this country and make sure that this stops, it's going to continue. And, we all have grandchildren, I think. We ought to think about that.
I stumbled onto something the other day that apparently I have no reason to doubt its authenticity. Harry Belafonte was told by Dr. King right before he was assassinated. And what King said, in essence, was, we'll keep up the struggle for civil rights. We'll keep up the struggle for equality, and we'll win the struggle. We're getting to the point where we'll win the struggle. But I fear we're integrating into a burning house.
Wow.
Let's talk about a good point on the part of Donald Trump. He talked about how desperate he talked about Gaza, but he said that he's not willing to go to war with Iran. And he wants to negotiate with Iran on a new nuclear deal between the United States and Iran. I would assume that at least Netanyahu he didn't seem so happy about that. He wanted to make sure that the United States keep that sort of pressure on Iran. Here comes the question, how is that going to play out for Donald Trump? We know that he was the one who has decided to withdraw from the JCPOA. And right now he wants to negotiate again. What's in it for him, and why he has decided to do that, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, we all know that Trump has a craving for admiration and to be treated as an indispensable leader. He loves to be the great intermediary. I myself was quite impressed that Trump, in his last administration, not once, not twice, but 3 times, met with Kim Jong-un in North Korea, which was a remarkable step and something bitterly opposed by all our diplomats, CIA, intelligence, State Department, all of this. It was viewed as naive. So I think this is one of the hidden strengths of Trump, maybe unconscious strengths of Trump. But if he could pull off something that would make him look good, I think he would be willing to work at it. So I have a little bit of optimism in this regard, that his ego may bring him to do some intelligent and hopeful and maybe even productive things as time goes along, that the so-called foreign policy blob, will not do. And I feel, by the way, you gentlemen may feel much the same, but I feel quite torn on the business of tearing apart the blob or the Washington consensus, because I'm not sure the Washington consensus has delivered much that's been very good for quite some period of time. So if they're going to get in there and throw some people out, it may be unfair. They throw the wrong people out. I don't know, but I do feel that some kind of shaking up is long overdue in what has been otherwise a kind of self-perpetuating, unthinking policy of enemies and friends. Once you're on the American shit list, you never get off it. You never get off it.
It's a self-licking ice cream cone.
Right.
Let me bring intelligence into this. In 2007, after the debacle in Iraq, where our former colleagues, Graham, falsified intelligence to justify the attack on Iraq, there were no WMDs there, and they knew that damn well. Iran was the next target for Bush and Cheney, clearly. They wanted to do Iran in their last year in office, 2008. Somebody had the presence of mind to say, oh my God, it's all going to be about Iran getting a nuclear weapon. Can we find an honest manager of intelligence to run a national intelligence estimate to see what's really going on there? And they looked all around and they couldn't find anybody. They finally went to the State Department, to Tom Finger, who was head of State Department intelligence said, Tom, would you do this? He said, I don't want any part of that. I took various footnotes in that estimate on Iraq. I don't want to have anything to do with these people. They said, no, Tom. We'll let you bring your own people, your honest people in, and we'll give you a whole year to do it. And we're not going to disturb you. And we'll have Congress ask for it. So when it's finished, Congress will publish it. Well, I know from having talked to Tom that he reluctantly acquiesced in this. He got really good people in there. They had the benefit of some fortuitous new intelligence, and they decided that Iran had stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and had not resumed. Okay, that was expressed with great confidence and unanimously by all 16 at the time intelligence agencies. Now, that prevented a war. That helped prevent a war, in my view. And you don't have to believe me. Look at George W. Bush's memoirs, which we analysts all had to read all this kind of stuff. Okay, he says this was an eye-popping decision. This prevented me from the military option for how could I, and this is a quote, how could I attack the nuclear facilities of a country that the intelligence community says has no active nuclear weapons program? Boomer, I couldn't do it. Now, what am I saying all this? Well, that was 2007. Every year since, by some miracle, the scientists and the engineers have reinforced that judgment, okay? Even Bill Burns, he said something truthful on his way out. A week before he left, he said, it's still true. And he mentioned all this stuff about 2007 and 2003. It's still true. They're not working on a nuclear weapon. Now, what did Trump say yesterday? If they start working on a nuclear weapon, that's because they'll be hell to pay. Well, he knows they're not doing it. And he knows, I think, that the religious leader of Iran, didn't he already forswear this and say, yeah, that fatwa is still in existence? So I share Graham's and others' optimism here that, this is good news. For whatever reason, Trump is trying to work out things with the Iranians. And maybe it's simply because he knows that the Iranians have hypersonic missiles and have already demonstrated ability to destroy things in Israel.
Yeah.
Javad Zarif, in his interview at Davos, hinted at all this. And Zarif is one of the few people in Iran that I believe when he does interviews like that and is very forthcoming in them. I knew Tom Finger really well. Tom was my go-to guy in INR when I was chief of staff at State, and then he was my go-to guy when he moved up to DNI. And really revolutionized a lot of the information sharing going on with the DNI, and then got frustrated and left because they corrupted everything he tried to do too. So Tom was a rare person in the intelligence community at that time. I would say what you said, Graham, about Korea and Kim Jong-un, except for one thing. What Donald Trump did without following through doggedly what he started was mess up our South Korean ally really badly. And part of what you're seeing in Seoul right now with the contention between the remaining conservatives who want to hold on to power for the United States and the bulk of Koreans who want them gone is caused by the perturbation he made in South Korea over promising finally to move towards a peace treaty and maybe even reunification of the peninsula, which is on the mind, I can tell you, of 75% of Koreans 24/7. They really want it. And they look at him as having fouled that. They gave him all that hope. He went to the DMZ, he crossed it, he shook hands. They thought the time has come now. And then all of a sudden, follow through. And that's what worries me with this too, because he may start this process and then not follow through. And then he's left with only one option, to do Netanyahu's business for him.
Well, at least John Bolton's not around anymore. John
Bolton did a lot to screw that. He did a lot to screw that up, which is to say that when Trump picks the wrong people, they can really mess him up. And man, has he got a bunch of the wrong people.
Yeah, except you never know who he's going to listen to.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I hope
so
he's listening to C.Q. Brown right now, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who happens to be a black man. So I know it's probably not, necessarily the best thing for Peter Thiel's boy to do to listen to this black man. But he's telling him, don't you do war with Iran, Mr. President, because you'll ruin it. You will ruin it. I guarantee you. We'll ruin it for you because we can't do it.
yeah.
Yeah. Graham, when it comes to the situation in Ukraine, do you find it right now that Donald Trump is, it seems that he's playing with Vladimir Putin, with all of these mainstream media rhetorics to force him to accept the terms on the part of the United States? Do you see any sign coming out of Russia that they're going to abide by, or they're going to accept the terms coming from the United States?
At the moment, I don't really see anything there, Nima. I mean, we're talking short term here, and I must say I'm a little bit unhappy. I had some I'm no Trump lover, but I mean, you have to acknowledge that even in his crazy manner, there are certain things that he does that can be useful. When he said he could fix the Ukrainian problem in 24 hours, obviously that was absurd, but I thought he could maybe do it in 24 days. Because the outlines of a future settlement, I think, are quite well known to all of us. No NATO, the Ukraine and the Russian-speaking provinces stay with Russia. That's basically it, and that's quite achievable. But I'm disturbed to see that somehow in the last few months the problem seems to have been maybe made more difficult. Maybe Putin feels that he's on the cusp of victory and therefore can demand a higher price for that. I don't quite understand why we seem the clarity of a settlement seems more difficult now than it did in maybe less considered days a few months ago. We'll see. But I guess, and also nobody has the guts to pull the plug on Zelensky or take the blame for having been the one who lost Ukraine. Maybe that's on Trump's mind. I have no idea that he does not want to be the one who lost Ukraine. Maybe
Graham, I think the departing administration in the transition briefings screwed up his national security advisor in that very regard. I'd love to see Trump fire him as the first member, gone. like Flynn or McMaster's gone, because I think that's what happened. I think they left enough vestigial aspects of their policy on his national security advisor that he went to Trump and said, "We got to slow this down. We're going to lose a lot of credibility here. We got to slow this down." I think if he hadn't done that, I think Trump would have been moving on it already.
Yeah. Well, that national security advisor was Sullivan. And of course, Sullivan gave him extensive briefings on what to expect. And my interpretation is for the delay is that Trump is just now realizing what a very difficult kettle of fish this is. That he has no good cards in his deck, in his hand. Mm-hmm. That Putin has all the big ones, and what's he gonna do, And so there's temporizing. What about this telephone call? Well, I don't know. Maybe the line is busy, but it's been 2.5 weeks now. Why doesn't he pick up the phone? I think Trump is just now realizing this is something that is a no-win situation. Now, at the same time, I think that Putin does not want to take over the rest of Ukraine, much less Poland or the Baltic states. So I see a PR thing where Trump could say, "Look, I got Vladimir, my good friend, to promise not to take over Poland and the Baltic states. He's not even going to take over the rest of Ukraine. He just wants the rest of Ukraine to remain neutral." Okay, so I got that from him, and now we can make a deal. Okay, I think that's possible. If it were otherwise, if the Putin wanted more than that, then it would not be possible. But so let's hope that Trump's learning curve is better than most of us think it is, and that he'll get better advice as the obstacles appear in front of him, and he'll do a deal. But it's not going to come easy, and it's going to be a real stretch to make that out to be a win.
And the trouble is that any deal essentially threatens the raison d'etre for NATO.
Right.
And I was struck by the fact that the former ambassador to NATO, Bob, name escapes me at the moment, in Washington, who said he basically felt that it was time to dismantle NATO with the collapse of the Eastern Bloc. And I think he was right. But, these organizations take on a life of their own, and NATO is really the American instrument for controlling Europe, sadly, very formidably, forcefully. So I guess I don't know how much Europe is in itself a complicating factor in this, or if they're just simply irrelevant.
But Trump said he didn't like NATO. I mean, he really said he didn't like NATO. And so he's the man to do it. All you got to do is demand 5%, demand 4%. They'll say they'll do it, but they won't do it because that would ruin their social programs. They'd have no social programs left. They'd quit being the envy of the world for all that they offer their people. So you do that, they're done. They're toast. And they need to be toast. Should have done away with the alliance when we started if we were going to do like Clinton did and expand it.
But Trump has asked for 5%.
I know, but they don't think he's serious. They do not think he's serious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing,
I'd get rid of Zelensky. I mean, I'd fly my plane to Moscow, and as I was going over Kyiv, I'd shoot the bird at Zelensky and tell him if he wasn't gone by the time he got back, I'd drop a 2,000-pound bomb on his head. Get rid of that dude, man. He's in your way, and he's illegitimate.
Look, another thought here, and this is sort of extracurricular thought. One of the sticking points, of course, is Ukraine membership in NATO. The Russians will never accept that.
No.
I agree. Okay. The head of NATO agreed that that's the reason why Russia invaded Ukraine, for God's sake. Okay, now, NATO is falling apart, right? So what's to prevent some window dressing for a final agreement where the Russians finally agree that the question of Ukraine and NATO will be revisited in 25 years? I mean, what's NATO going to be? So, there's all kinds of possibilities here to dress this thing up in an acceptable way. But Trump has to realize what the realities are first, and that he's playing a very weak hand. And Putin, although willing to play the game, has all the aces and the kings and queens as well. And that's the way the game is going to go.
I would be surprised
how to do 100-year treaties.
What's that?
I would be surprised if he.
Carter knows how to do 100-year treaties.
I would be surprised if Putin would accept a 25-year hold on it. I think that's just too much of a threat down the road for Russia, geostrategic threat. But who knows? But I don't think anybody that succeeds Putin is going to be easier to deal with by any means.
Yeah, I don't mean a hold. What I said was, in 25 years, we revisit the question of Ukraine. All kinds of ways to finesse this thing. That's what negotiations are all about. Sorry,
Graham, you just made a very cogent comment, and I just thought about it a couple of weeks ago when I was pondering this situation. I don't want to see Putin leave. I don't see anybody in his wake with his prudence, common sense, practicality, and ultimate strategic vision. So I want to do a deal with Putin before he leaves.
Yeah, exactly. And I would have to say, my name will be forever blackened in annals of foreign policy, but I would have to say that I think the combination of Putin and Lavrov is probably the most remarkable foreign policy team. And I insist, as you probably would agree too, Lavrov also. These are fine, mature, sober, patient people, statesmen with a global view, and in no hurry, and recognizing that dealing with an American that's in sliding into decline, it's a very dangerous America. It's
Yes.
like a snake in the corner, and you don't want to, or some other wild animal in the corner, and you just don't want to corner it too much because it could be very dangerous and act irrationally.
And I would add to that Wang Yi. Wang Yi is a very fine diplomat too. So you got two very fine diplomats in two of the major powers in the world. And you're
Well,
right. Ricardo Alarcon, when he was head of the National Assembly in Cuba, said to me one day in a protocol house outside Havana, you know, Larry, even a dying elephant can thrash a lot of grass, and we're only 90 miles away.
Yeah.
He was really worried about this as early as 2009, 2010.
I want to do a self-sacrifice here and join Graham and Larry on the blacklist of those who think we're damn lucky to have Putin and Lavrov and Wang Yi in place. They are reasonable people. They are not bound on conquering the rest of the world like old commies used to be. We're going to deal with them and recognize them as sensible people.
Yeah, Donald Trump wants Ukraine to pay back with their minerals, rare earth. He doesn't know mostly they're located in the eastern part of Ukraine under the control of Russian army.
Look at what's happening in Central Africa right now. You got really bloodlust going there now because you got buyers standing all around the borders, as it were, and you got these gangs taking these critical minerals and selling them and making a fortune, and therefore financing even more robust killing and murdering. It's like the Belgians were back in Central Africa, and we're going to have to, you know, the whole world's going to have to do something through the WTO or whatever. We're going to have to do something about this trade in critical minerals. I watched a webinar from the Naval War College a couple of weeks ago, and we had all the major military people on there who knew about all these weird named minerals that nonetheless are devastatingly important for things like cell phones and where these minerals are. Two of the most serious ones, China has 95% of. So
Right.
how Ping did with rare earth metals, they've cornered the market on two of them already internally.
Right.
So we got to have a better regime in this world. You know, the
I
rules
agree.
aren't working.
Nima, if I could see if we could change the topic, possibly, if you don't mind, and if
Go
my
ahead.
colleagues don't mind, I would love to hear their views. Mine don't count, or not particularly informed. What are you gentlemen's views of the future of the CIA in terms of, had it been politicized or been becoming politicized, or will it be more politicized, or do you feel more comfortable with the Tulsi Gabbard over the top of it all? What's your prognosis on this?
You can lead that one, Ray.
Well, I was thinking of writing a tweet to Tulsi Gabbard today to say, decline. You don't want to be part of this regime, given what the president said yesterday. Okay.
What
Now,
did the president say yesterday?
well, about Gaza, about U.S. owning Gaza. Right?
Okay.
Now, she's not been good on those kinds of things, but still, she has, in my view, some principles. So let's say she gets confirmed, which seems to be likely now. Will she have the internal fortitude to tell the president what really happens rather than what William Burns used to tell President Biden, namely that Russia has already lost, their military has been shown to be ineffectual before the whole world. He told Biden that a year and a half ago. And Tulsi's predecessor, Avril Haines, bless her heart, in December of 2022, said publicly, don't worry, Russia's running out of ammunition. They don't even have any indigenous capability to replace the arms that they're leaving willy-nilly on the battlefield with the Ukrainians scooping over. Give me a break. So it can't be any worse, okay? I don't know much about John Ratcliffe, but I have briefed Tulsi Gabbard once when she was in the House of Representatives. She's smart as can be. She asked
That's
really good questions, and she listened. You know, it lasted 25 minutes, but she listened. She was interested in veteran intelligence professionals for sanity and what we did and what we intended to do. And we are going to get in touch with her as soon as she's confirmed to say, look, you did have an alternative. And I'm happy to say that both Graham and Larry are part of that operation, and our record stands close scrutiny. So I don't know what's going to happen, but the place has been thoroughly corrupted, and that happened during when I was still on active duty there. It also attributed to a fellow who actually worked for me back in the early '70s. His name is Robert Gates,
Yes.
and he saw
yeah.
that he made uh, Russia the bugaboo, and he and Casey were able to persuade everyone else that Russians would never change, that the Communist Party of the Soviet Union would never lose power without a fight. Okay, well, he was wrong on all that stuff, and what did he get? Well, he got to be head of CIA, and then he got to be head of the Defense Department. So that's how it goes. So yeah, there will have to be a wholesale cleaning of house. I think there are some experts there, like the ones on Iranian nuclear, who have stood their ground, for God's sake. Don't remove those guys. But, he should have time now with Ratcliffe and hopefully Gabbard in place to look into this and see, who has been most responsible for this terrible, terrible advice they've given Biden on Ukraine and on other matters of considerable consequence, like China.
And he said about 6 months ago, and I paid real close attention to this because I was in on the arguments as we built out to the DNI. He said the DNI is not a powerful position because he has neither people power nor money power. He's right. He's very right. So he said right after that, someone had been advising him, well, I am going to darken my door to the CIA director. He shall not cross my threshold. But the DNI is going to cross my threshold every day and talk to me. Now, there are disadvantages to that too, of course. We finally bit the bullet, Goldwater Nichols 2, if you will, and made the DNI like we've made the chairman in the real influential place that Congress for years didn't want him to be. Intel and military. We've now put him in the hands of one person's influence on the SecDef and the president. And we're doing the same thing with the DNI on the president. That's efficient. But is it what we want? I don't know. It all depends on the character of the DNI, I think. And I agree with Ray. In this case, I spent an hour with Tulsi on the JCPOA, and about 45 minutes into the briefing, which lasted the other 15 minutes just because we shot we just had a conversation. I said to her, we're leaving because we got other people to talk to, and you know more about the damn deal than we do. Why are we briefing you? And she did.
Do you think that the intelligence community is going to be able to bring certain reality to the president and those around him as to the nature of decline of U.S. Power and prestige and authority? That's, of course, exceptionally sensitive area. But I think if you don't think of the U.S. in slipping into decline and the problems that promotes and the choices that it confronts you with, I think we're not going to do very well.
I think you're absolutely right. You've got to have an acceptance of this major power shift that's taking place over the next generation or two, and you've got to accommodate it. And the best way to accommodate it is with a similar strategy to those who are getting the power at your expense by being accommodating, by being harmonious. They call it comedy, cooperation, and collaboration. That's the way we're going to deal with the future. How else are we going to deal with the changing climate, and ultimately with nuclear weapons too? Except
let me
cooperation.
Let me add here that the audience probably doesn't know that Graham Fuller was the equivalent of the deputy for the National Intelligence setup for analysis. In other words, were you a deputy of the National Intelligence Council? Yeah, okay. So he's asking these questions not idly, okay?
Yep.
So the question really is, if Tulsi comes in, and Ratcliffe is smart enough to realize that if he's going to serve this president, he might as well tell him the truth. Then what Larry has been saying about the shift in power globally, and what Graham has been also saying, will be undeniable. They're going to have to tell him the truth about that because it will be experientially, okay? So we can hope, but there's a lot of cleaning out to do. Keep the good people. I was faced with when torture and all that kind of stuff came up. I thought, well, we ought to abolish the CIA, okay? And then I thought, wait a second, you want to throw out the baby with the bathwater? The baby that Graham and I worked in was worth preserving. And then I was affirmed in my judgment when that estimate came out, shepherded by Tom Finger, saying that Iran had stopped working on a nuclear weapon, okay? And I said, okay, well, you were right, Ray. Hold your fire. Right now, it's been so degenerate that I'll still hold my fire, but it really depends, as Larry says, on the character of the person who comes in. And I have certain hope that Tulsi might be able to chip away at the ignorance that now persists within the intelligence community.
Do you think there has been a corruption of the intelligence community, the integrity of the intelligence community over the past 5, 10, 15 years?
Of course. I mean, I think it's without doubt. I would say that's easily demonstrable.
Apocryphal or not, when John Kennedy said after the Bay of Pigs fiasco that the CIA ought to be broken up into 100,000 pieces and scattered over the face of the earth, that was a pretty good assessment.
Let me ask Graham a really interesting question. The law creating the National Intelligence Director, the Director of National Intelligence, includes giving him or her responsibility for participating in the planning and the evaluation of covert action programs. Whoa. Now,
That's new, Ray. That was not true under my watch.
yeah. Well, it didn't happen under your watch, and it didn't happen under my watch either, except for Bill Colby, who occasionally gave us, I was the NIO for Western Europe at the time. He occasionally, well, he came to me one time and he said, there's this band of retired generals in the Azores, and they have plans of what they want to do with those young lieutenant colonels in Lisbon. We know about it. Kissinger is behind this. He hasn't told us. You go down there and tell Kissinger we know about it. So I had to do that, okay? Now that was idiosyncratic. Colby was different. In your experience and mine, nobody else did that, but it's in the law, and that's what's got everybody really upset within the operations part. And you worked in operations as well as analysis, Graham. So, wouldn't that put the fear of God in the covert action folks? And do you think it's at all possible that she will assert that prerogative?
I doubt it somehow. I mean, the covert action, in other words, intervening covertly in foreign affairs, usually militarily or money-wise or whatever. I think that's something that the U.S. will find extremely difficult to give up, and particularly as we lose power in other senses, either political or diplomatic power or whatever else, we may find being able to pull off some kind of covert actions, more minor ones here, there, elsewhere, is one of the last games we have to play. But I don't know, and I don't know how you uncorrupt, if you will, an organization like CIA. And I suspect that uncorrupting really means establishing an organization in which there is an openness and willingness to speak truth to power and not be afraid and twist it. I'd hope that William Burns, the president, or just departing chief of CIA, would fall into that category, and maybe he did somewhat, but he got overcome by the whole Ukraine thing. To my and being very knowledgeable about Russia, I was
Hmm.
just really dismayed that he was somehow either lost it or felt he couldn't say no to the president.
Yeah, in 2008, he was
One of
told
the
by
things that
Lavrov.
crippled Bill, in my view, was the same thing that I watched cripple other people at the agency and other places in the intelligence community. And it's been going on since Reagan and Poindexter and Ollie North did Iran-Contra, so to speak. And that is that the NSC staff reaches out. They don't even second them to the NSC staff. They just demand that they operate under the NSC director put in charge, and they do the covert ops. That's the way Victoria Nuland was working. That's the way several people worked within the administration that I served. The staff ran things, the staff at the NSC. You can lay that on Henry Kissinger to a certain extent because he was the first to operationalize the NSC staff, which was never intended in the Congressional Act that set the thing up. And so if you do that, you run the CIA with their own people.
Yeah, now let me add a little personal thing here. I was working on the White House support staff preparing the PDB under Nixon, okay? Now, I was so out of sympathy with Richard Nixon that I wore a black tie every day into the office, okay? Black tie. Now, I wasn't much of a clothes horse, so nobody noticed, okay? But Bill Parmenter called me he was the deputy chief of current intelligence. He calls me and says, Ray, there's an opportunity down at the White House at the NSC staff. Would you be interested? And without even thinking, I said, Bill, I am so out of sympathy with the things that Richard Nixon are doing that I would be a security risk. Don't count me out, okay? He smiled. He said, I understand. I went back to my job. Okay, who got the job? Bobby Gates.
Yeah.
Bobby
And
Gates goes down to the NSC, right? Works for Brzezinski, helps do that wonderful stuff on Afghanistan, and then to defeat Jimmy Carter, he participates in the October surprise, which is now documented not only by Bob Perry, but by Craig Younger in this wonderful book. Go to the index, look up Robert Gates, and you can say he was involved intimately. Does that surprise you, Craig? I mean, Graham? You knew Gates almost as well as I did. He worked for me in the early 70s, but Gates was involved with Casey and the others, meeting with various Israeli and Iranian and other officials to make sure that the hostages in Tehran were not released until Reagan was
I remember
inaugurated.
that. I remember
Do you
that.
remember that? Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
And now
But-
Bob's down at William & Mary as our chancellor, funneling all the bright kids at William & Mary into the intelligence community.
Well, you're
Well,
steering better there.
it may be that things have always been bad in this regard, that there's always been corruption of intelligence through power, and maybe because we were too young and too naive and too idealistic to understand it and fully grasp it. But maybe this is just the nature of things, that even the intelligence communities can be corrupted by power. And in that sense, maybe we shouldn't wring our hands too much, because that's just the way things are. I don't know.
No, Graham, thanks for that. But I have to say that there was one halcyon time for me personally. I was briefing the president's daily brief every other morning. Reagan preferred to sleep in, right? So I briefed Schultz, Weinberger, whoever was the national security advisor. Most of them ended up in jail, actually. And then the vice president and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Now, I was able to tell them what I thought. I was a senior analyst. I was trusted. My boss, Chuck Peters, faced into Gates and the others and said, let McGovern stay. No, we want him out of there. Okay, you go tell the vice president that McGovern can't brief you anymore. They wouldn't do it. So for 4 years, while Gates and Casey were telling all these characters that Gorbachev was just a clever commie, that he wasn't for real. You can't work out with him. I was telling him the real deal as I registered it from people I trusted, mostly the people looking at overt publications in FBIS analysis group. Okay, so I would give when I walked in one time. I walked into Schultz's office, and his secretary handed me a piece of paper. Oh, Secretary Schultz, you've been invited to go to Moscow. Gorbachev would like to meet you. So he looks at me. I suppose your superiors would say that's a lousy idea. So I said, well, Mr. Secretary, you know that I don't always agree with my superiors. You know, I don't think that was out of line. He trusted me, and he went to Moscow. And Weinberger was a lost cause, but the vice president and the chairman and joint chiefs of staff, and depending on who the national security advisor was, they could listen. One other little anecdote: there was a first national security advisor named Judge Clark. He came in with Reagan. Okay, he was.
I
had a
remember.
big. Yeah. So I'm briefing him, and I'm briefing him on something that Chernenko, one of the Soviet leaders, had said about whether a possibility would be for an arrangement on reducing missiles in Europe, what eventuated into the nuclear forces treaty. Okay, so I have this, as usual. I have this legal pad, right? I've got a 30-minute briefing, I've got a 20-minute briefing, I got a 2-minute briefing. So I told him that it looked like what Chernenko said yesterday shows that they are prepared to exempt, not demand on this thing that they've always demanded on before. I forget exactly what it was. And it was as though Judge Clark had never heard Russia and concession before in the same sentence. And he said, well, tell me more about that. Suffice it to say, I lasted 20 minutes with Judge Clark. When I got back to the office, he calls me on the secure phone. He says, I want to know more about it. Can you come down? Then I got a call from Robbie Gates's office, head of intelligence. And he says, look, no more direct contact with Judge Clark. That'll come through me. So that was the situation. What I'm saying here is, there was this halcyon time for me, and it turned out that Schultz and Bush, and to a degree, what was his name? Wonderful Joint Chiefs of Staff guy, that they prevailed on Reagan to listen to Gorbachev. Pardon?
Crow or Vesey.
Yeah, it was Jack Vesey, brown shoe soldier, commissioned in World War II, terrific guy. Okay. So all these people were able to listen to me as well as to these troglodytes. I dare say I may have had a marginal significance because other people would tell them the same thing in the State Department. But it is possible to do this. And when I say all this is because Tulsi Gabbard will be running the president's daily brief, you know, and to the degree she recruits really good people willing, not only willing, but able to tell the truth, having been senior analysts, been around for a while, had been around for 25 years by then, okay? So all I'm saying is there is hope, and we don't need to say it's corrupted beyond belief. Let's cross our fingers and hope that the truth will prevail. And, you know, there are two new faces, Ratcliffe and Gabbard. We'll see what happens. Sorry to take on so long for this, but this this is interesting stuff for me, at least.
Trump learned a little bit from Reagan in that regard. My students used to ask me, why, after we've studied all the presidents since World War II, does Ronald Reagan come along and have 6 national security advisors in 8 years? I said, because he wanted to be president. He didn't want a Henry Kissinger or a Zbig Brzezinski, who were the 2 previous examples. And he actually said that to his authorized biographer.
Mm-hmm.
Told Powell and Carlucci that too, his last 2 national security advisors.
Yeah.
I've read so many because I keep them guessing.
Well, I seldom got to see the president, President Reagan, but in retrospect, he was head and shoulders above a lot of the others of them, and I admit that candidly.
Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being
We've
with us today.
exhausted you, Nima. We've exhausted you.
No, at all. Not at all. I was enjoying your talk. Thank you so much for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always, having all of you on the podcast.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Nima,
Nima.
and thank you for bringing us
See you
together.
soon. See you soon.
Good.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Take care.